Welcome everybody to another episode of Table Talks. Today, I have the honor of being in a conversation with Doreen Killens. Doreen's a 40-year veteran of the physiotherapy world and international teacher, and now an author of the book, Mobilizing the Myofascial System, a clinical guide to the assessment and treatment of myofascial dysfunctions. Many of you out there probably know Doreen as the co-owner of the acclaimed clinic, Doreen Killens, and others of you may remember her as the Chief Examiner and Instructor for the Canadian Orthopaedic Division of the Canadian Physiotherapy Association. Now, some of those titles are now formers, like former Chief Examiner, because Doreen has stepped aside to focus more on the courses that she's developed. And so, Doreen, you've developed multiple postgraduate courses in the mobilization of myofascial systems, and now teach extensively throughout Canada and Europe. And I feel like there's a bunch of big gaps in there. Can you fill in a couple of those gaps?
Recently.
I'm just going to mute everybody again.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So where do I start? I teach presently both in French and English because French was my mother tongue, although I did all my schooling in English. And so I feel very grateful that I'm able to switch back and forth in both languages, which is wonderful. Mm-hmm. In terms of my history and that kind of thing, I started as a physiotherapist. Oh my goodness, I graduated 40 years ago, as you said. Seems like an awful long time. When I went into physiotherapy, the average lifespan of a therapist was 2 years. Because it was mostly a female-dominated profession, and they stayed and worked for a couple of years, and then they had babies, and you never heard from them again. And it's changed immensely since that time, thankfully so. So here I am, 40 years later, and I'm very grateful because I was kind of led to this profession, and that's a whole story unto itself, and I still love it to this day.
And that's really one of the questions I wanted to ask. I know you started 40 years ago when there wasn't a whole lot of mentoring, there wasn't a whole lot of courses, there wasn't a whole lot of anything. How did you how did you sort of find your way into this?
Okay. Well, I always loved biology. Physics and chemistry I could do without, but I love biology. And I realized early in grade school that anytime the teacher mentioned blood, I actually passed out. So I figured, okay, I like biology, but I don't think I'm going to become a nurse, or I don't think I'm going to become a surgeon. And to me, the idea of being a doctor to give out prescriptions, it just didn't appeal to me. And went on, studied high school, CEGEP, health sciences. And then I happened to be going to see a dermatologist because I had eczema. And I saw him once. He was an older man. I don't even remember his name, but I think he was an angel put in my path because he assessed me, gave me some cream or whatever. And then he sat me down and he said, "So what are you studying? What are you interested in?" And I thought, oh, okay, well, I'm not quite sure. I responded, I'm thinking maybe of dietetics because I was always concerned with diet, nutrition. And I happened to see on television some kind of show about a physiotherapist working on amputees. So I was intrigued by that. I was just kind of attracted to that. And I said, well, maybe physiotherapy. And he looked at me and he said, physiotherapy. It's like he knew, and the most striking thing, not only did he take the time to talk to me, but he arranged for me to see and visit the physiotherapy department at the Royal Victoria Hospital. And I grabbed a bunch of friends to come with me, and I could see firsthand what it was. And I thought, yeah, that feels right. And the irony of it is I ended up working at the Royal Victoria Hospital for 8 years, soon after I graduated. So I felt that he was kind of sent in my pathway to, lead me where I was supposed to go.
Yeah, really serendipitous.
Yeah.
What happened in those 8 years? Or were there other clinics after that? Or were you like a physio, or did you have a...
No, I was a physio. And at that point, I wasn't too intrigued by orthopedics because it was, you basically what today I called shake and bake therapy. You know, you chased me around with an ultrasound, and everybody got the same exercises for low back pain, you know, or lumbago as they called it in those days, and it was kind of boring to me. And so I thought, what am I going to do? And so I went to work in a hospital where they switched you around every few months.
Oh.
So it was an amazing opportunity to learn. I mean, I worked in ICU, I worked with respirology, I worked in amputees, neurology, burns, you name it, I did it all over the hospital. And I took my first manual therapy course 5 years after I graduated. So that's because there weren't that many around in Quebec at the time.
Yeah.
And when I took my first manual therapy course, it's like an aha moment. It was like, oh, this kind of makes sense to me. And I thought this intuitively, I just felt that there was something here. Okay. And I remember the teacher at the time, he told me, oh, you have good hands. And I thought, yeah, he's just flirting with me, you know? So I just thought, okay, I couldn't feel what he could see. And I actually started to learn to feel in a level 3 peripheral manual therapy course. One of the teachers there, she taught me how to feel subtle resistances. And it just switched everything in my hands. And from then on, it just kind of exploded.
Nice.
Yeah.
So what was it from the moment of walking to the first hospital where it was all shake and bake to the moment you left and basically started?
So I did a bunch of manual therapy courses and got my my level at that time that was called the Part A exams. It was a Canadian national exam in peripheral manipulation, and so I was doing the kind of orthopedic physio that I wanted to do in the hospital, but I was being pressured to see like 4 people an hour. And that just didn't fit with me. And I sat on a number of committees in the hospital, and I knew that things were going towards essential services. And so I figured, you know, low back pain and neck pain is not going to be essential service. And so that's when I went to explore what else is there other than a hospital situation. And at that time, there were very few private physiotherapy clinics. And so I went to work for a clinic called Esprit Sport, owned by Marianne Dalzell and Monica Kosiuk, and spent a lovely 3 years there. And ultimately felt that I needed to open my own clinic with my business partner, Elaine Maurer. And we had a clinic together for 25 years, and we sold it 4 years ago now, 4.5 years ago. And honestly, you know, some people do this on their own. I had the luck, if you like, of choosing and being with an amazing business partner and friend. And you know, we built something that I think was extraordinary in those times. And a lot of manual therapy teachers that teach in Quebec today, at some point or other, they came through and worked at our clinic. So I think, you know, in that way, we had a lot of influence in the teaching of manual therapy in Quebec and in Canada. And then, of course, it exploded into as well, you know, France, because the France has adopted the Canadian system of teaching manual therapy. So that was in large part due to Elaine's efforts. And so, yeah.
And you were responsible in a large way, I think, for bringing in people from all over the world to do in-services at your clinic. And probably one of the reasons why you were always a sort of a step above everybody else.
So Elaine and I owned this clinic, but we also owned another company where we organized courses for physiotherapists. And because of our contacts, we were able to invite people from all over the world who were, you know, known to be specialists in their area. And we invited them to Montreal to come and teach us. And so I can't count how many post-grad courses I've done since I graduated McGill. Maybe even close to 100. I don't know. I've lost count. But doing these courses, you know, Elaine and I were like, we were selfish. We wanted to learn, but we also wanted it to be available to not just our staff, but all the Quebec therapists, you know. And so, and now a number of other people are doing course organization like that. So we were no longer involved in that, but it was a wonderful way to learn. And you know, I'm the kind of therapist, I have a lot of tools in my toolbox. I don't believe in any one form of treatment. I never have, and I pull out what I need depending who's in front of me. And even with the same person, what you choose at the beginning is not necessarily the same thing that you end up doing down the road. Because most of my clientele is chronic issues. I don't get the acute, you know, ankle sprains very often. And often these people have multi-layer to their problems, and you have to address one after the other, and you address what is most prominent. And then you take off what I say, like the layers of the onion, basically. And you keep a track on, you know, the subjective and the objective complaints, and you test and retest to see if whatever hypotheses you have are helping or not, you know, because we all have our tangents, we all have our preferences, and you try and stay as much as possible, you know, in an organized, way, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah.
But having said that, I think, you know, the optimal therapists, shall I say, are able to access both sides of their brains. So there's the logical, analytical left side test, retest thing. And I think that's really important. But if you stay stuck in there and you can't think outside the box, it's like you quickly come to the end of the limits of what you can do for your client. And some therapists will say, well, that's all physiotherapy can do for you. Or you might have a central pain problem, and which may be valid, but I think, you know, the pendulum has swung between like hands-on, was all about manual therapy for a while, to hands-off. And so the pendulum kind of swung, I think, personally, too far to the hands-off. It's all about pain education. And I think the magic is in the middle, somewhere in the middle between those two things. And you have to be aware of all what they call the yellow flags of people who are catastrophizing their pain and you know, just keeping the orchestra going in their brain. You have to be aware of all that. But keep in mind that a lot of these people have a number of issues, and you have to peel off the layers. And so that's left side brain, but that right side brain is more the intuitive, creative side, which when melded together with the you know, more analytical part, is a wonderful place to be. And so, you know, a lot of what I developed in terms of the mobilization of the myofascial system was, to be honest, it was kind of downloaded from that right side, creative, intuitive, spiritual, call it what you want, you know. But it was, you know, my challenging patients. It's like, hey, what else? And the what else just came to me. I just got out of the way, basically.
I got a shitload of questions that I've gone through in my head, and I've gone through with you prior to doing this, and I want to change all that all of a sudden. You know, I think this is really crucial. I don't think I've ever had to talk to anybody online or, you know, recorded or not, that has the strength and to just talk about. I've got 40 years of experience of hands-on and clinical and all the courses that I've taken, but I get a lot from Spirit, and you kept doing this, and I think it's really crucial, because one of the questions is you know, you stepped aside from this major position, nationwide position, to teach. So part of the question is, you're talking about being guided, and then do you teach that? So let's just go back to step one, which is, would you like to share, or are you open to talking a little bit more about Spirit? Because this is a language that you and I speak. I mean, we speak the language underneath the words that are being spoken, and I've always appreciated that about us. But if we could share that with others, that would be great. I'm just
and I do speak this language to certain patients as well, and some of them, you know, get it and they want more, and others look at you like deer in the headlight look, and that's okay. You know, they get what they get. I have an idea and I've lost it.
Yeah, I feel like I'm interrupting you with my desire to hear.
Well, you know, in the perimenopausal years, you know, things come at you, and so at one point, I was, I had this idea for this book in the back of my head, and it was there for like 10 years before I actually wrote it. And so the message I kept getting, was like, okay, write me. And it's like, but I'm not ready yet. I'm still gathering information. And that was true for a large part. And then at some point, it's like, okay, I have a lot of information here. It's an ongoing process, I recognize, but it's like I have enough to be able to put down on paper. And then it was the message, it was like, all right, well, I don't have time. And then the message I got back was, well, make time. And I'm like, okay, that means I have to get rid of certain things that I'm involved with. And, all through my professional life, I got tired of hearing myself say, I'm so busy, and so part of that is like, you get to recognize, is that just ego talking, and so it's like, okay, well, unbusy yourself, like, let go of stuff that you're no longer passionate about. And so, or give the chance to somebody else to go with it,
That with the chief
Yeah.
examiner.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, I loved teaching in through the Canadian Physiotherapy Association and being an examiner and a chief examiner. It was an amazing experience, and the whole program evolved, through the years, from being just mostly joint based to adding on motor control and nerve mobilization and clinical reasoning and pain sciences. It's really evolved. But by then, in my 50s or so, I was just like, okay, I need more time to teach the fascia stuff, which I felt had been a little missing from all the courses that I had done. And Tom Meyer's book, Anatomy Trains, was the inspiration for my work on that. And so I wanted more time to teach that. And also, it didn't make sense to me that physiotherapists stopped at the occiput C1. I mean, there's all this stuff about the cranium, which initially was like an osteopathic approach, a very gentle 5-gram thing. And that worked for acute conditions, but it was frustrating for me as a therapist who saw more chronic conditions. And I felt I needed more like manual therapy for the head, Right. So anyway, I ended up being mentored by a Dr. Phil Greenman, who was the dean of the osteopathic school at Michigan State University. And so he taught me a cranial approach, which is more like manual therapy for the cranium. And that spoke to me. And so that's what I teach, because it's like basically mobilizing the fascia inside the head is what it is. It doesn't stop at occiput C1. I teach both of those things. So I wanted more time to teach that. So I had to let go of other things.
What a big step, a leap of faith, I guess. Let me go back to, like, here's this opportunity to talk about spirit, because I know that I've been sort of given some flack by people that I teach and say I feel it, I see it, because I can see light and I can feel it. Sometimes in odd cases I can smell it, and it can be really disturbing. But when somebody's receiving, they're like, I don't care what it is. This is really helping me a lot. But when you're trying to teach people, I've had people say, it's just not fair. You can't teach that. And I thought for the longest time, you're right, you can't teach that. I was born like this. I've been like this since I was a kid. But can you teach this? Or maybe I'm asking, will you?
Okay. I'll tell you one thing. In the last chapter of my book, I talk about things that relate to fascia that perhaps are out of our scope of practice, such as nutrition and hormonal balance and that kind of thing. And I have a section in there about things I wish I'd known as a new grad that I picked up through the years and through my mentors. And then I have a whole section on spirit and a little bit about my story with regards to that. And I felt like I had to write it. It's like it was somebody pushing me on the back saying, you have to write this and take the courage to be out there and just put it down on paper. And I thought, okay, and I was taking a chance, because in this evidence-based world that I live in, I stood to take a lot of flack for that. And so I thought, well, I'm doing it anyway. because
Yeah.
that's who I am. It's part of who I am as a person, but also as a therapist. And interestingly enough, the feedback that I got was really, there was nothing negative. It was all positive, and most
Wow.
in relation to that chapter.
Yeah.
It was like really unreal. And
That's
so you talk about being able to teach that stuff. And like I've always said, I have a difficulty languaging this whole spirit stuff.
yeah.
And I think it's a story I tell myself.
Yeah.
Um,
I
yeah,
get that. There's
um,
a
I'm
vernacular
getting
that comes
better. I'm
with
getting better at it. And
yeah.
at one point, I was asked by a group in Quebec City to do a master class, a one-day
Yeah.
master class.
Yeah.
And they said to me, "We just want to pick your brain." I'm like, "Okay, like you want me to what? Not prepare, or no PowerPoint, no what?" And they go, "No, we want." I said, "Well, give me an idea of what you want." And they said, "Well, we want to know how you palpate. What's different in your palpation?" And I went, "Oh, okay." So my brain started going, and of course I prepared a PowerPoint. And what I realized is that when you're connecting with someone, you're not just connecting on a skin to skin level, you're connecting with their energy. And so I had to go into the whole energy fields and how we feel about that and how you approach somebody. And so all this nonverbal communication is like really important. And I've read somewhere that, 97% of communication is nonverbal and energetic. And so you can't deny that. And so I had them feel what it would be like, to be able to feel somebody's energy without touching. It's like, and so in that group of people, you had some that had done courses with me before, and they kind of looked at me and go, yeah, yeah, yeah. And other people that had just graduated, and they looked at me like deer in the headlights looks like, what is this, Yeah. And then I had them palpate, when you get on to say a radiohumeral head, how it feels like when you're thinking radiohumeral head versus just sinking into the tissues and seeing what the body, has to tell you, basically, and your hands.
Yeah.
You don't feel with just your hands, you feel with your whole being, right? And the feedback from that one-day masterclass was actually pretty good, and
Right.
it was nothing again negative. And the called left side brain people, wow, I never thought about things that way. So
Nice.
I feel like there's another little something
Yeah.
brewing in the back of me saying, okay, you've got to go towards this direction, because I think that's what therapists, it's what the therapist knows or the courses they've done is one thing, but who they are is almost as important or more important.
Yeah.
And how they listen to the clients and don't make them feel like just another number. And everybody wants to be heard, and everybody wants to be understood. And so there's a lot to be said about things that we're not taught in physio school or whatever school you've been to, that evolve with time or not, but.
That just brings me back to my original question, which is just a second ago, not the first one about energy at all, but the one of, maybe you're the person now that's going to initiate that. I mean, you were one of the initiates that created the physiotherapy layers and platforms that we have today. And maybe now your job is to create the new platforms for physios or manual therapists at all to tap into their abundant spirit.
Okay, I'm getting yes.
Good.
Yeah. So
I like how you said.
Having said that, I don't hear voices. I don't, and I don't see things. It's just like this thought that comes into my head out of nowhere. Or when you ask a question, when you're, connecting to that level, it's like before the question is even finished, you've got an immediate answer. It's like it's not coming from my head. I'm not inventing this. It's a different kind of communication.
You're allowing a message to come through, and you're actually doing something.
You get out of the way. You get out of the way, basically.
Yeah. You can choose to listen or not, right? And so.
Right. Yeah.
And I think that's the part that can be taught.
We get guidance. We get guidance all the time. It's just, are we there to listen? And in order to listen, you have to get quiet.
Yeah.
And know how to do that. And so, I'm sure I'm not the only one. People have been through crises or difficulties in their lives, and that's one of the tools that I learned back in my late 30s, because it was something that I pushed away. Like you, I was sensitive from the get-go,
Yeah.
and but I pushed it away because it was all about science and, you know, logic and blah blah blah, until I couldn't push it away anymore, and that was in my late 30s. And then I ended up meeting my, you know, the person who became my teacher along those lines. And basically, you know, if I had to summarize what she taught me, it was how to stay grounded despite the chaos around you. So it's like, you know, grounded like a tree rooted to the
Yeah.
ground.
Yeah.
And the more grounded you are, you could have a hurricane going on out there,
Yeah.
and it doesn't really matter. You're okay. You're solid. And so she taught me how to do that. And so it's an amazing tool for everyday life, especially these days. I don't know what I would do if I wouldn't be able to connect up, you know?
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
yeah.
I like the fact that you were able to bring the spiritual to the physical, because that's actually how clients are when they come in the door. They don't realize where the pain is residing in them, and sometimes it's not physical. And you said palpation equals energy, and that, you know, that's a perfect thing for me to hear from you, because the very first day that I met you, I was working with Betsy Ann Barron at your clinic at Myofascial Killens, and she came down, or later on the day or something, we were somewhere else, and she said, "So did you meet Doreen?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "She's nice, eh?" It's like, and I was just like this long pause, and she's like, "What?" Like something terrible. It's like, she's like an antenna. And Betsy was like, "The fuck are you, what?" And I thought that's what you were. And later on that changed to, you know, the sort of mentor person, but you were just like this big glowing ball of energy, and you were like just receiving information. You don't have this conversation with people that don't get that. So I just sort of until now, and you say palpation is energy, and so your fingers are like little antennas. You're really sort of, you're allowing it to go in, and whatever comes out, you have to be honest with what comes back. Is that fair?
Yes.
Yeah.
Did you want to talk about your story about your injury when you were doing marathons?
Oh my gosh, you know, that was a real eye opener for me, because there was a time when I was just kind of exchanging one pain for another. I wasn't taking responsibility for my inner self, and I was running marathons and running like 130 to 150 kilometers a week to compensate for that. And of course, something had to give, and something did give in the back of my leg, and you know, my power just went down, and I had access to you, and you said, "Yes, I can see you like right now." And you did all the assessments, you did the single leg, all the things that you would normally do, bending and then closing your eyes, and just went through. And I think these are all normal. These are all normal. She's going on my back. That's kind of weird. But you know, it was sort of focused in the hips. And at one point, you were behind me doing an assessment, and you went, "Hang on a sec." And then there was this really pregnant pause, and eventually I was like, "What?" And you were like frozen in space. Having this conversation with somebody who I didn't, you know, and you're like, "Yeah, you're right." And then you went down to my toe, my big toe, and you said, "There's a thing in the phalangeal joint, the first metatarsal on the first ray of your left foot, and it looks like there's an old break." And it's like, you went, I forget what you did. There were no needles at that. There's no dry needling or anything. You just sort of did this little adjustment, and my whole body just went, whoa, big sigh, you know, the body sigh. And that for me was, well, two things: that you went way outside the box. I mean, who would have looked for a back pain in my toe? For me, I was like 5 years in. What did I know? But the fact that it was just like turning around and watching you have this inner dialogue that was really not so much inner. It was very clear that, and I went,
So that's a perfect example of what I mean when you get this guidance. Now today, because I've done more training, in particular in the integrated systems model with Diane Lee and LJ Lee, I'm able to look at the body in a totality and say the patient is complaining of, say, SI pain. Recognize that the SI pain may not be due to the SI. It could be driven by something else, either in the foot, the knee, the hip, the thorax, the cranium even. And so you have to evaluate all of that in relation to whatever functional task is problematic. So, for an example, if sitting is an issue, you want to evaluate, a quarter or a half squat, but evaluate not just the area of pain, but evaluate what's going on in terms of non-optimal mechanics, and see when you correct one, does it affect something up above? If it does, then we call that a primary driver. You can have co-drivers too. You correct the driver. So in your case, you had a foot-driven low back pain, and so that way your back kind of went, oh, thank you very much. Okay, so I can explain it more logically today. But back then, when I had seen you, it wasn't so logical. It was just this message coming through me. So, as an aside, if you're a therapist, in particular, a physiotherapist, and you're listening to this, if you have the opportunity to do the integrated systems model work, it's a long course. It's like 4 weeks. It's a game changer, and it helps you organize your closet of tools. So that's all I got to say.
I'm gonna write that down. So when I post this up on Facebook, I'll put all the links for that.
Diane Lee teaches it, and LJ Lee calls it Connect Therapy. So they were teaching it together, and now they've gone their own separate schools with their take on it. But they both teach this approach.
There's part of me wants to ask about the teaching, because it's not so much the course that you give. I know that there's multiple courses, right? There's the ones that you teach.
There's 3 levels of fascia courses, and there's 2 levels of cranial courses that I teach. So there's cranial level 1 and 2, and the fascia courses that I teach, for the most part, they are in conjunction with Betsy Ann Barron, with her approach called structural myofascial therapy. And so she teaches the fascia stuff based on structural integration, which is the fascia around, let's say, the muscular system. And I teach alongside with her fascia in relation to the articular, sometimes neural, sometimes muscular system. So it's based on fascia from a physiotherapy point of view, is what I teach. Okay, so the mobilizations that we do, well, take and make it into something fascial. And that treatment approach basically developed out of my frustrations, my clinical frustrations, where I just, the patient, I knew that the problem was there, but it kept recurring, like it was something that was pulling on it. So what was it? We looked at, the joint, the muscles, the this, that, what else could it be? The what else for me was often the fascia. And so when I teach with Betsy, we teach our course together to physiotherapists primarily. And she teaches her own set of courses, just her approach to TRPs, massage therapists, orthopedic therapists, that kind of thing. But it's approach, I steal from her, she steals from me. I mean, we share and some really neat stuff in both approaches, and we think it's complementary. So we have a lower quadrant, an upper quadrant, and an advanced, which links up the lower and the upper quadrant, in particular with the deep front line of fascia. So,
I'm not sure if I would use the word groundbreaking, but I don't think there are very many physios that align themselves with fascial therapies, like therapists like that. Is that?
It's getting there. The first fascia conference, there was mostly structural integrators, massage therapists, some osteopaths, some MDs, very few physios, I'll tell you. And now with each subsequent, they have these conferences, these international conferences every 3 years or so. And the next one actually is in Montreal in September.
My backyard.
Yeah, September 2021. Yes. So International Fascia Research Congress. And so more and more the physio world is waking up to the idea that, there might be something out there. And I think that's my mission, at this time, is to kind of spread that out as much as possible. Because it is a fascinating and really fun way to treat as well. So
I love the fact that exists at all. I love that I know you both, and that you're both super extraordinary therapists. I think at the beginning, I can't remember if I said this, but I consider you a leader. I mean, I've referred clients to you because it's out of my scope of jurisdiction or scope of practice or my jurisdiction, and consider you a leader when I talk about you or when I refer to you. And one of the things, I mean, there's a mentorial, is that a word? You're like a mentor. I've often looked to you for answers, whether it's on my own body or it's just asking for an answer. And but the coolest thing that you ever did that really made me sort of open my eyes was you went, I don't know. and that was like, you're allowed to say that? And let's find out. Let's find out. You got an extra 5 or 10 minutes? It's like, holy fuck, this is awesome.
Yeah. Well, you're absolutely right about that, because you learn all the time, right? I hope I never get to that point where I feel I have all the answers, honestly. Yeah. And you learn when you take a course, you learn when you teach, you learn with your difficult patients, you learn with the questions that students ask you. And I always end my courses with a quote from Tom Myers, and he says, the more I learn, the more I learn, something about the wider my horizon of my ignorance extends, or something to that effect.
Nice.
And so, the more you learn, the more you realize how much you don't know. And I think that's okay. And it's okay not to have all the answers. I mean, things are always evolving, and as they should. And so, it's to have that inquiring mind and be open to other possibilities, not stuck into this is how I do it.
Yeah. So it answers some questions, and of course now I'm getting stuck because it generates a bunch of other questions, and I don't want to take a whole lot of time. I want to leave time for other people to ask questions, but you brought up the Fascial Congress. I think you've been to every single one, right?
Yep.
Since
I have,
Harvard.
There are other fascia conferences like in Europe, or small groups of things, but the international ones are every 3 years, and I've been to every one of them since 2007.
Harvard, Amsterdam, the third one was.
And initially it was like really dry, cellular kind of research stuff, and I'm like, oh boy, it's becoming more and more clinical, which is really fun now. But it's a great place to network too, And in fact, that's how I met the publishers of my book. Handspring Publishing, is through a Fascia Congress in Washington, and it was like, having a glass of wine with Kathy, I forget her last name. She wrote a book about scar tissue with Handspring Publishing, and she and Betsy and I were having a glass of wine. She says, "Oh, you have to meet the Handspring Publishing people. Oh, there's Mary, and I'll introduce you." And so, we talked, and Mary said to me, "Well, how about tomorrow at break time? We come and do a chit chat." And so I did, and she heard me out and asked me a bunch of questions. She says, okay, and sent me a book proposal, which I had to fill out, which took a couple of months to do because I had to do a sample chapter as well. I had to do a sample chapter, and and then they send out this book proposal to a bunch of people and say, what do you think? And but it was all this networking that occurs, with these conferences that is.
Yeah. Well, for me, I was so new in the business. It was I'd used this term before with Doug Alexander, and I said it was like drinking from a fire hydrant. That just all this information. And you seem to sort of, like when we were in Vancouver, you're like, oh yeah. I felt like I should be taking notes, and you're just like letting it wash over you. And so it's like, she's been here before. But for me, there are so many aha moments. And I still, some of them were so ingrained or like engrams in my head that I still use them word for word when I'm talking to a client, because I can't come up with my own words, and it works. Are there still moments like that for you? Aha moments, or?
Oh, all the time. All the time. Oh,
not just at Fascial Congresses, but all the time.
No. I mean, obviously because I'm in the teaching world, and you're trying to stay on top of the research, and there's been an explosion of research actually since the beginning, but you're trying to stay on top of it. And so this is a great way to see what's up and coming. And in fact, with this whole COVID thing, there's been a bunch of webinars I've been listening to through the Fascia Research Society, like
Yeah.
you're seeing stuff that's not even published yet, and it's like,
Yeah.
yay, you know, because I'm trying to, let's just say, justify what I do, you know, by research that's being done, and
Yeah.
you know, it's getting there. Let's put it that way, you know.
Yeah.
Um,
Nice.
yeah.
I love that you're still sort of absorbing, not just open to it and letting it wash over. You're really sort of
Oh no.
absorbing and unloading other stuff that.
On many levels, you know, you absorb it as a clinician, you absorb it as a teacher, you absorb it um, energetically, maybe, you know, so on many levels, yeah.
I would. Uh, you're still treating, right? You're still, or
Yep.
are you? Yeah.
Yeah, no. So when we sold the clinic, we had to work for them for 3 years, and that ended, oh gosh, a year and a half ago, I guess. And so I took a little sabbatical at that point. My body was telling me, you need to rest, girl. And you know, I'm always looking for the next project, and whenever I would meditate, the answer I would get would be just rest. And I'm like, okay.
I don't know how to do that.
I know, and I'm still getting that response. So just be okay, and until I'm drawn to something else, you know. So I've lost my trend of thought.
Or even though you sold the clinic 4 years ago, you had to work until a year and a half ago.
Then Elaine still works for them, you know, less because she still does a lot of teaching. So she still works for, now it's called Kinetex Sports Physio Côte d'Artu. And I went to work at another Kinetex, West Island, which is 5 minutes from where I live. And the group there is terrific. And so I do, when I'm in town, I do 2 days a week. And I'm doing, you know, more teaching. So, you know, I've always said that if I'm going to teach, I have to be hands-on with my clients, because I've been taught by some people who are not hands-on, and it just becomes an intellectual exercise. And what you want from a teacher is like, okay, this is what I find works clinically. Try it on for size. And you only know that if you're in the trenches. And, you know, and like I said, I still love what I do. And I'm not, you know, I'm 64 now, but I'm not ready to retire. And I don't know if and when I ever will be. So I don't know, you know.
So the courses that you are given, I mean, there's a website, right? There's the Doreen Killens .education. I'll put that at the end of the posting tomorrow too, and on YouTube. But does it explain, like there's a little elevator speech of what each course does?
What the courses are about, the objectives and that kind of thing. I don't organize courses myself. It's usually, you know, where I'm invited to some organization or clinic or whatever will organize the course. So there'll be a contact for that. Now, given this COVID thing, there's a few things that are obviously not up to date, and I'm just kind of waiting to see, because I had a number of courses that were lined up for the spring that will have to be postponed for another time. But the information is there on all the courses, and the assistance that we have, and our, you know, our whatever motto, so to speak. So
can I just ask one more thing before I go to the people that are still like 20 people that are probably all want to ask questions, but if there was one thing that we could leave listeners or future listeners to ponder, or you could gift them a thought, you know, any golden rule.
Golden rule, my goodness.
Pearl of wisdom.
I guess, you know, there's a few things that come to mind, but trust your intuition, trust your hands, they don't lie. You know, your head will try and explain all kinds of things, but your hands don't lie. And keep learning. Those are the things that come to mind right now.
Yeah, I'm sure there's something about that connection to spirit and all that. You know, I don't want to make up words.
No, absolutely. To me, when I talk about intuition, creativity, spirit, it's all one and the same. You know.
Yeah. If I ask, is that something that someone's going to learn, whether they come in for the technical left side of the brain thing, or they learn right side brain?
Well, it's like anything else. When you first learn something, you have to process it through the left side of your brain, so you understand what you're after. But
Yeah.
but part of the learning, and that's why I struggle with doing like only online learning, because when I'm teaching, I've actually got my hands on top of the therapist's hands, and I
Mm.
feel what they're feeling, and I can guide them. And when the light comes on, it's like, oh my God, yeah, I felt that. And that's what you're going for, you know. It's like when you get, it's like riding a bike. Once you learn that feeling of release, you don't forget it, you know.
Love that.
And so I don't know how I could do that just with online learning. But
Mm.
so yes, there's when you're learning something, you're learning left brain, and you're learning also just getting into it and just going with the flow. Um, yeah,
So
and
the,
it's different for every person. I remember when I was teaching spinal manipulation at one point, there was one therapist who only got the rhythm of the manipulation if she sang to herself like row, row, row your boat. And so
frequency.
we had her just that, you know, boom, you know, and so
Wow.
I shouldn't have to sing it out loud, you know, with her patients, but she said that a little bit helped her, you know. and
Nice.
and I remember saying to someone else, it's like, well, okay, because he's a little bit heavy-handed, and I said, I want you to think that you are seducing the tissues and not raping them. And he looked at me and he got it. And he teased me about that for years later.
Nice.
But he got it. You know, it's like you've got to just, you know, place your hands, yes, and wait for the invitation from the tissues. They'll tell you where they need to go.